Thanks for joining us for this edition of Weather Center, and happy holidays. I'm Sharon Resulton. We are going to go through the overnight now and talk a little bit more about the active weather in the east and in the west. There is plenty to talk about. Fortunately for you travelers, it's fairly quiet in between those two locations. Let's illustrate that by looking at the water vapor imagery, and we'll start you out by putting it in motion. And you will see quite a bit of moisture in the east and also extending out into the Pacific Northwest. Two separate systems to be concerned with here, affecting two major areas of the country. We know about the moisture that's been moving into this area for the past week. That has been the pattern, keeping some heavy rain and some flooding conditions. Many of the rivers at about bank full or just over that point in parts of the Pacific Northwest. And in the Northeast, well, new problems here, and it's primarily a problem for you folks who might be doing a little bit of traveling. If you look close enough, you can see a little disturbance, and this is going to continue to work its way eastward. Throughout the evening on Wednesday, this has been the focal point for helping to generate a few strong thunderstorms that produce some gusty winds. Those should weaken a bit as they cross over the higher elevations. But we are going to find an area of surface low pressure developing right in here that will tend to move on northward. Because of its close proximity to the Atlantic waters, it's going to draw some of that moisture on in. The end result, your travel weather is looking wet in parts of the Northeast, extending from southern and northern New England all the way back down through New York City. That means you in Atlantic City. If you're watching even from around D.C., you could find some wet weather. And it's just going to be a wet go of it for you folks either participating in or getting up early to watch the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Plan on taking along the rain poncho and maybe a little layer underneath it, as temperatures are going to be a bit on the chilly side. Look for some readings in the 50s. A little snow into the Adirondacks, and that's not going to amount to much, maybe just a couple of inches. There's a look at your travel weather across the Northeast, keeping it wet all the way down into North Carolina, and in the Pacific Northwest, equally wet here. It's taken some time, really, for some of that moisture to work down into northern and northwestern California. What's happening here is that the trough is still well out here into the Pacific. A couple of disturbances rounding the base of that trough are tending to deepen it, and so it hasn't made a whole lot of eastward progression. The front right here along the coast, and since it's parallel to that flow of air, it too is not getting much of a push onshore. So we're in sort of a stagnant pattern with our onshore flow. The moisture, the very moist Pacific air mass, bumps up against the mountain chain, and we're finding some heavier rains at times due to some of the orographic lifting. So the more significant moisture in the Cascades on westward, not so much across eastern sections of Washington and Oregon. Look at the cold air cumulus clouds. That's an indication that there is definitely some cold air to be found here. Eventually that's going to swing on in and the snow levels will begin to go back down, but that too is going to take some time. All this being kind of slowed down until our front finally makes its way on shore, and that should happen as we go on into Thursday and into Friday. Little moisture too working on into Southern California, so it looks like you'll have a little bit of some fog to deal with. If you've got some early morning travels, you want to plan accordingly. Travel weather in the northwest again is looking a bit on the wet side. Higher elevations will find some snowfall. Here's a look at the rainfall amounts that we've seen thus far, and this dates all the way back to last Thursday. So in a week's time, we've had up to 6 to 12 inches of rain in parts of Oregon and Washington. Over the past 42 hours, in other words, with the very latest storm, we've had anywhere from 2 to over 6 inches of rainfall. So some significant rain coming down, and still at this hour getting some reports of some heavy rain. The winds have packed a wallop. We've had winds gusting as high as 111 miles per hour around Cannon Beach, Oregon, and we're still expecting some pretty strong winds into the overnight, so small craft not advised to go out there onto the water. Heavy surf extending all the way back to around Point Conception, California, and around Santa Cruz Island. Windy travel is going to be a factor, even extending into parts of Montana and Wyoming. There's a look at your precipitation forecast, and as you can see, the snow will tally up, but really only into the higher elevations, maybe up to 6 inches at best. Overnight low is going to be on the chilly side, no doubt about that, but nothing too terribly cold. There's no big Arctic outbreak to speak of across the lower 48. In fact, it's relatively mild. Temperatures a few degrees above what you would expect this time of the year. We'll be watching our area of low pressure across the northeast, some rain as we head into the early part of the day in New York. Some of those showers may linger into the afternoon, and by evening, still a little wind left in parts of the northeast, and keeping some unsettled weather too as we go into the northwest. Later in the day around San Francisco, a chance at some showers for you, but at this point, it doesn't look like you'll see anything too terribly heavy. There's a look at highs for Thursday, still at or above the average, and still looking downstream here, or I should say upstream, and we're still finding a lot of stormy weather out there in the Pacific. Let's take a closer inspection with your extended forecast.